with the 24-hour news cycle, it's the flash of the day, but nobody ever connects the dots and says, hey, this is the strategy, this is what's working, okay, this is the execution of the Chinese Communist Party in this industry sector, and so on. I mean, we all hear about Huawei and 5G and so on, but we forget where Huawei came from. Huawei was born out of theft from Northern Telecom. Northern Telecom,
or Nortel.
Nortel,
yeah.
Correct. Nortel was the largest company in 2000. It was the largest company in Canada. It was worth $30 billion. It was the largest employer in Canada, the oldest company in Canada, the big AT&T of Canada. In 2000, the Chinese Communist Party got into the network through the Chinese military, and the company executives did not take it seriously. The IT director was running up and down the hallways with his hair on fire, and they're like, calm down, and so on. Well, fast forward, by 2008, you had a $30 billion company in Canada and a zero revenue company in China that nobody ever heard of. After 2008, no more employees, complete bankruptcy with Nortel, and now you have a $30 billion company in China called Huawei.
Just how has the Chinese Communist Party used unconventional tactics to wage war on the US for the past several decades? And why did almost nobody notice? What is asymmetric hybrid warfare? And how is it central to the Chinese Communist Party's strategy of attack on the West? And how can companies, universities, and governments effectively protect their innovation against this assault? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. In this episode, we'll sit down with Casey Fleming, chairman and CEO of the intelligence consulting firm Blackops Partners. He is an expert on security strategy, asymmetric hybrid warfare, cybersecurity, and economic espionage, and he regularly advises the private sector along with the US government. Casey Fleming, great to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's a pleasure.
And I should say, finally. So, you've been, I guess, interviewed by the Epoch Times, I think numerous times around some of your expertise around China and something that sounds very complicated, asymmetrical hybrid warfare. We'll get into that in a moment because it's actually something really, really important. I want to talk about China. And when we were talking even, say, 3-4 years ago about China, it was a very different picture, I think. And how about you tell us how things have changed?
I think the country, the government has woken up to the fact of just how serious the threat is, the threat from China. And before it was kind of, we were looking at it as one-off instances. It was kind of amusing at the time, and nobody really connected the dots. And I think what you've seen now is a groundswell. The government is all in on this China threat. And recently has come in all in on it. And they realize now that it must be a whole of nation approach, just as the Chinese Communist Party has a whole nation approach against the United States and all of our Western allies. So you've seen a swing, a shift over to a whole of nation approach, which now includes not just the government, but the private sector, which includes both business and academia.
You almost make it sound like we're at war here, but we're not, right?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask the Chinese Communist Party, they are in absolute war with us. And consistently they have said they are at war with the United States. And it's a life and death war. To them, it's a life and death war. To the United States, we're not used to that. We're not used to what war is. In the United States, Americans, and even our Western allies, war is you're either in war in a bloody battle with uniforms, tanks, planes, and generals, or you're not. And our adversaries have waged what they call an asymmetric war, an asymmetric hybrid war against us. And that's everything short of conventional war that we're aware of. So I think the first thing everybody needs to understand is the war that is being waged and has been waged on the United States and the West has incidentally been around for 34 years, even longer than that, since the start of the Communist Party in China, which was 1949. But in 1986, they came out with a nation-state directive called Program 863, and that's after 1986, month number 3. Which I'll give you my layman's terms, will basically lie, cheat, and steal to global dominance. So that's the war. And so we all have to understand that they have waged war on us. We have not waged war on them as a conventional war, but the war that's being fought is something that we're not used to. We're not used to this whole hybrid warfare thing, which is everything asymmetrically from all sides. So an asymmetrically is basically attacking from all angles, all sides, to weaken the United States and to take over the United States. That's really what the end game strategy is. They want to defeat capitalism. They want to completely defeat democracy and turn the world into their own order. So we have to understand what the war is, what the fight is, and that's what the whole thing is around asymmetric different directions, hybrid warfare. Now, what's hybrid warfare? Hybrid warfare is achieving military gains through non-military methods. That's what hybrid warfare is. So remember asymmetric, remember hybrid, and then warfare. We don't like the word war in the United States because that means, very nasty things. So what this is a challenge. It's the bigger name is called great power competition.
Okay.
About every 70 years, if you look at history, about every 70 years, a nation or couple of nations come up and say, we want to challenge the world order. That's called great power competition. Today, in our time, in current day, that is, of course, China, Russia, and they've got friends by the name of Iran and North Korea. So they're all allianced together, allied together, and they're all communist. And the other thing is, when we talk about China, some people regard China as another democracy, and that's not the case. China is a clear, serious, oppressive, authoritarian dictatorship communist country. So there aren't two Chinas. There's one China, and it's a communist-driven country with a command and control with a straight line through the country. So we have to understand that as Americans and our Western allies. We have to understand that, and if we're doing business in China, whether we put a plant, a laboratory, a development center, we're selling into China, we're buying Chinese products, we're partnering with the Chinese Communist Party, and that's absolutely the truth if anybody does any type of research or studies into what this is. So it is what it is, and what's refreshing is our government, and I met with senior leaders yesterday of our government, and they underscore the seriousness of this. It's an existential threat to the United States because the Chinese Communist Party wants to, weaken us through our economy, which is where our strength is. Our strength is through our economy, and they want to weaken that by stealing the technology and so on. Another point, you have to understand what our adversary is all about. Our adversary is all about live versus die. In other words, their philosophy is we must live, but you must die. So when we compete, we have to win. In other words, we live, you must die, so you can never compete again. Americans are completely foreign to that. We believe in win or lose. If my team doesn't win this year, the Super Bowl or the World Series or Little League, the clock sets in January and I get another shot.
Come back and fight another day.
Come back and fight another day. With the Chinese Communist Party, you will never come back and fight another day. The other thing people don't understand about the Communist Party is that they have no intention ever of coexisting with anyone. They want to absolutely dominate and control the global universe as we know it today. And teachings inside of China through the Chinese Communist Party is that we've basically owned the globe, the world, for 2,000 years, and we are going to rightfully own the world back again. And it's on their date is the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, which is 1949, and 100 years is, of course, 2049. So you have to understand your adversary. So are we at war? Not necessarily, but our adversary is certainly at war with us. And if you're at war with an adversary, you have to know your adversary intimately, and that's where we focus, and we communicate and raise the awareness accordingly.
Right. So would you say this is primarily an economic war? Because it's been described as what's happened recently with the tariffs and so forth as a trade war. Is it primarily been a trade war or economic war?
The answer is, your operative word was primary, and the answer is yes. So the primary focus is the economy and defeating the U.S. economy. And to do that, it's through financing, through banking, through stealing intellectual property from every company, whether you're doing business in China or not, if you have intellectual property, and of course you do because that's what you sell to make a profit, then you are targeted by the Chinese Communist Party and all that has to offer. That means the military, all the operatives, all the citizens that they control, and so on. So yes, it's economic, but there are over 100 different methods of asymmetric warfare. Drug warfare, they're behind fentanyl to weaken America. So you can, your family, your cousins can order fentanyl and have it in your mailbox in 3 weeks directly coming from China. So there's drug warfare, there's propaganda warfare, religious warfare, all these type of things. So we do reports on that quite a bit, but there are, typically we have a slide that's about over 40 of the main. Cyber warfare is a key vector, but it's not the be all and end all. Our companies are all focused on cyber, thinking that's where the focus needs to be, and there does need to be focus on that. And I'm certainly saying, don't take your foot off the pedal on that. But you've got to look at all the other methods that they're using to extract information, and the goal is to put your company out of business. Assistant U.S. attorney by the name of John Demers came out with a fantastic and a very accurate quote, and it's basically rob, replicate, and replace. So where is your company or your university in this whole rob, replicate, replace piece of it? Okay, so you're absolutely in one of those stages. Rob is where they're stealing your intellectual property. Replicate, they're selling your intellectual property, your product to your customers at 30 cents on the dollar. So how long can you compete? And then replace, is to put you out of business. I mean, rob, replicate, and replace. So where is your company on that spectrum? Because your company is absolutely on that spectrum because you have intellectual property.
So, this actually reminds me of the Segway example, this iconic brand where basically the IP was stolen, the competing product was reverse engineered and created, and then with its success being sold at perhaps 30 cents on the dollar, I don't know, that company actually ended up buying Segway. Mm-hmm. So I think that illustrates your point.
And there's literally hundreds of those, and nobody really connects the dots. We do that because we caught this a long time ago, but nobody, with the 24-hour news cycle, it's the flash of the day, but nobody ever connects the dots and says, hey, this is the strategy, this is what's working, okay, this is the execution of the Chinese Communist Party in this industry sector, and so on. I mean, we all hear about Huawei and 5G and so on, but we forget where Huawei came from. Huawei was born out of theft from Northern Telecom. Northern Telecom.
Or Nortel.
Nortel, yeah. Correct. Nortel was the largest company in 2000. It was the largest company in Canada. It was worth $30 billion. It was the largest employer in Canada, the oldest company in Canada, the big AT&T of Canada. In 2000, the Chinese Communist Party got into the network through the Chinese military, and the company executives did not take it seriously. The IT director was running up and down the hallways with his hair on fire, and they're like, calm down, and so on. Well, fast forward, by 2008, you had a $30 billion company in Canada and a zero revenue company in China that nobody ever heard of. After 2008, no more employees, complete bankruptcy with Nortel, and now you have a $30 billion company in China called Huawei. Today, Huawei's about a $110 billion company that has plenty of money to basically offer, you want to get into 5G, we will pay for all of your equipment. There's no startup costs. We'll just lease the equipment to you moving on because they've got the cash that is derived from selling products to Americans and the Western allies. So that is another perfect example. Another one is American Superconductor. It's a windmill company, windmill energy company. Best of breed, fantastic windmills, and the technology came down to the code, the source code that was inside these computer chips running these windmills. So China ordered $1 billion worth of windmills in their backlog, their pipeline of backlog of product to be manufactured and shipped to China. They took the first 100 million and then they realized, we're done. We've reversed engineered the hardware on this thing, but we need the software. And they figured out that there was one of 7 people in the world that had the software. So they spent 28,500 euros on women and alcohol and bars, and was able to get the source code and the chip away from I think a 29-year-old system engineering manager in Austria. And so once they had that technology, the source code to run those windmills, they canceled $900 million from this moderately sized company. So their stock went from $45 a share to $4.50 overnight, basically over a 90-day period. And the U.S. attorney at the time quoted it as corporate homicide. So this is what's happening in every industry. And it's rob, replicate, and replace. And there's literally hundreds of those examples. Another one is a very large microchip or microprocessing company where they stole 50% of the IP. They absolutely extracted 50% of the heart and soul and the future of the company. The Department of Justice got involved, the FBI got involved, and so on, but those secrets are gone. And it's not a good day when the FBI knocks on your door. Typically, your secrets are in the wind and they're not going to come back.
So we've reported a lot on this, how the Chinese military works with the hackers, works with the universities, and then works with industry in this kind of circle. Now, you mentioned that America is committed to a whole of country approach. Mm-hmm. That's very new, because what we know is that China very much has a whole of country approach through the command and control system of the Chinese Communist Party.
Absolutely.
Right? But it's a little difficult to imagine a whole of country here in America right now, at least to me. How's this working?
It is, because our government is typically fragmented and separate, because private sector kind of keeps government at arm's length. Government kind of keeps private sector at arm's length. And academia is kind of out there on their own, and the military's out there on their own, and we're all kind of fragmented. So what's extremely new and extremely refreshing is our government has realized that the Chinese Communist Party has a whole of nation approach and has to destroy the United States, our economy and our democracy and our capitalism. And the only answer back is the same whole of nation approach. And the only time I can actually remember a period like that in the United States was World War II. So we're at a World War II juncture now where the government absolutely wants to work and desires to work with the private sector, again, which includes both industry, business, and academia, and where we're all working singly in the same mission to combat and to defend against these threats. And again, it's not just economic espionage and stealing IP. It's drug warfare, religious warfare, all these type of things. And you can find this information there. You can Google my company, Blackops, and my name, and we have a slide on that. It's what I call the money slide. It's basically the Chinese Communist Party strategy, and it's the asymmetric strategy against the United States and the West. And Russia plays in about 6 or 7 of those. Information warfare, which is also known as cognitive warfare. That's what we're all dealing with now, with the fake news and the deep fakes and the videos. And trying to sway public opinion. If you control the mind, you control the country. And so we all have to be aware of this information, this cognitive warfare that's going on. So it's a serious time. We as Americans and the West and the rest of the world have really enjoyed a pretty good run and a pretty good economy. And we have serious adversaries that want to take that away and make it their own, to a world of oppression, a world of misdeeds, and something that we find very distasteful with the runnings and the history of the Chinese Communist Party. So it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of good versus evil, which is what's happening now today. And again, what's refreshing is our government at the very high levels says enough is enough. We're not going to allow you to steal our innovation and our industry and our economy, and we're going to defend that very, very significantly. So it's kind of a unique time. I know we've been trying to get together for several months and do this interview, but it's kind of appropriate because just very, very recently, this sea change has happened with our country, where we are all on the same team, and to me, that's very exciting.
You know, it is, absolutely. And at the same time, I can't help but think, there's untold billions of dollars of investment that are, basically caught up in the Chinese economy or in the grasp of the Chinese Communist Party. And we've had experts like Robert Spalding on explaining how, that money is very tough to get out, if not impossible, right? So that's some serious leverage against this, again, the private sector and government and academia in the US all working in conjunction. How do you see this playing out?
At some point you have to understand, where do you kind of turn the faucet off or turn the faucet down? So you know that your money is at risk doing business in China. You know it's at risk, so do you continue to put good money after good money into a very, very risky scenario? And now even these existential things like this coronavirus is
Right.
completely unplanned for, but that you can see how risky your investments are in China by having, just by something that was not even planned, which is a coronavirus that's basically freezing the Chinese economy. It's freezing the supply chain of materials and products to the United States for us to make products or sell to our customers and so on. So the question really begs to companies and to universities, how much, we've got to start looking strategically at the money that we put into the Chinese communist country that's playing out now, that people are understanding it doesn't come without attachments. It doesn't come without strings attached. It comes with risk, and we're seeing now with the coronavirus, that's just an inkling of the risk that, by putting plants, laboratories, cooperation with university campuses, sister campuses in China and so on, that it comes with extreme risk. And I think that we tend to, in the United States and in the West, because we're a capitalist society, I think that we're too enamored with the cash flow and the money, and we don't ever want to look at the risk on the other side of it, that what it may come with. And I think now our government certainly is swinging to the side of being protective, and I think it's going to force private sector, which includes business and academia, to understand that the money in a communist regime is money that is at very high risk. And I think this coronavirus piece of it and the trade wars and so on and so forth, that's a very good window on the future of where it's coming. So each company, each university needs to understand how much risk are we willing to tolerate by these investments that we're making in China.
So, let's look at coronavirus, this scenario. We know we've had people on the show, we've already talked about how, the initial cover-up of the existence of coronavirus and the punishment of the people who were raising the alarm, and that this sort of stuff is actually structural to the Communist Party and the communist system. And I thought that was very interesting as a window into how it actually functions. Mm-hmm. You want to speak to that a bit?
Just anything that comes out of China as far as information is all state-run propaganda. And it's again, it's typical of every communist regime. So nothing is really planned, or nothing is allowed to get out of China. And if it does, you're severely punished in the regime or by the regime. So you have to understand everything that's coming out of China as far as any type of information has to be the party line. And if it gets out through other methods, through the people, then those people are severely punished. So they're I think what you're going to find out, I think the truth is going to come out probably a year from now of really what truly happened, and what the origins are and what the cover-ups have been and so on. Even recently, the government, the Chinese Communist Party, has said that we kind of did not react quick enough, and so they're actually falling on their sword a little bit, because this thing has become pretty serious on a countrywide basis.
Now, based on what you've seen on, let's call it the information warfare side of you expect them to blame America or something like this?
We're hearing that they already are through social media channels and so on, that they're blaming the United States for planting the coronavirus and stuff. So all I can say is let calmer heads prevail, and let's see what happens a year from now, what really plays out. I think the truth will finally come out. It'll probably take a year. once we're all past this thing. I hope it doesn't grow any more than it has, but we're hearing that the numbers are grossly underreported, both on infections as well as the deaths. And like I said, because we're dealing with a Chinese Communist Party regime and a communist regime, we don't take anything. We've learned never to take anything at face value and just let it all play out, because time will tell, and time always, well, most of the time will tell you what's going on. So my time parameter on that is about a year.
Okay. You mentioned religious warfare a couple of times as something that the Chinese Communist Party uses against the U.S. What is that?
Again, that's just another vector, another method of asymmetric warfare to weaken the United States. So they'll do information warfare campaigns, which is cognitive warfare, to get into the mind and so on. They really don't believe in religion, and they think that Americans are weak because we believe in religion, and they use that against us. So it's just anything that fights our beliefs around religion. So those type of things. Just expect our values to be attacked. Expect that, when you see things in the media, they may not be right. Expect that social media and even the regular mainstream media, when they're reporting, understand that some of it is not factual and it can be levied by some of our adversaries. So it's anything that can be used to fight our beliefs that we were raised in as children, and whatever religions that we are special to or raised with, anything that attacks those and renders those obsolete or inaccurate, to again weaken our resolve. And they know that most of us are very religious people, and they want to weaken our resolve by challenging those religions. And that's the same with any one of those vectors, those attack vectors of asymmetric warfare.
So, one thing that kind of jumps to mind, and it's very interesting to think about all of this from a perspective of a type of warfare. But I'm thinking about the 1,000 Talents program, and I'm thinking about the top Harvard professor of nanotechnology that was basically recently indicted by creating an institute, and getting paid really gigantic amounts of money for any academic, and top guy in technology. And this strikes me as something that would fit into this is an attack vector. How do you see this situation?
It is absolutely an attack vector. That's education warfare and propaganda warfare. And the 1,000 Talents program is supported by the Confucius Institute program and the Confucius Classroom program.
Can you just maybe briefly explain what that is and how that works, this 1,000 Talents, how it fits in?
I only allotted about an hour for this interview, so you're asking 3 days worth of questions. But propaganda warfare is exactly what you think. I mean, there's a Chinese company throughout Hollywood that is called the Wanda Group, and it's run by the Chinese Communist Party. By the way, every company in China is every company in China is a facade as a company. It's the command and control in every company is the Chinese Communist Party. They have employees and executives that have to swear oath to the Chinese Communist Party, and if it's a large company, they actually have a Chinese Communist Party group, command and control group in your company headquarters. So the Wanda Group is there to influence and to be propaganda through our film, and because think about it, Americans love movies, and they want to influence, make America look worse than it really is, and of course make China the victor, the all-powerful in movies and so on. In fact, the new Top Gun movie coming out, they made the Chinese Communist Party had them change the trailer, and I'll leave that to our viewers to figure out how they changed the trailer from the previous Top Gun trailer to the new Top Gun trailer. Might have to do with something on the back of Tom Cruise's jacket. So, hint. So that's the propaganda side. But getting over to the education piece that you asked on Harvard University, it's influence. It's influence as well as a pipeline. Think about it. Starting an institute It's a pipeline to send intellectual property directly to China in an absolute fire hose conduit to make that happen. So it's, 1,000 Talents program. It's to absolutely influence, put some money out there and pay some professors to get this information directly over there. How else are they going to be able to destroy our economy and sell our products to our customers at 30 cents on the dollar? Because there's no cost for research and development. There's no cost for innovation, which, by the way, when you make a cancer drug or a computer chip or a super soybean, or it doesn't matter, the first one cost $10 billion, right? The first one to produce cost $10 billion for all that research and development. The second one costs, 2 cents, costs a nickel. So if you can get rid of the cost of the first one and just go straight to the second one, that's exactly what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. They're eliminating the step, and people, it's not just money, it's the time. They say it takes 10 years to develop that hybrid seed, or it takes 10 years to develop this DRAM, dynamic random access memory, or to develop this and then just to steal it. Again, it takes 10 years and say $10 billion, but we don't care about that. We're the Chinese Communist Party. We just want to know how to mass produce this and to cut you out of the program.
I remember that you had you did an estimate of what the cost of that IP theft was, I think through your operation.
The number that the government runs on is about 600 billion per year. And that's the raw innovation, the raw R&D, research and development, the raw innovation stolen out of the economy. But you have to put the MBA number on that. That's, I think, and the government just gives you the raw number. But if you're a business executive, a CEO, board of director, that computer chip or that hybrid seed or that cancer drug or you name it, whatever it is, that engine in a car or that fuel system in a car or that battery or that whatever, that technology was meant to power your company for 7 to 10 years. Okay, so that investment, I made a $3 billion investment in a cancer drug, and that was meant to power my company for anywhere from 7 to 10 years in revenue, profit, and jobs. Well, you have to put that, you have to figure that number into the 600 billion each year. So I say that the number is certainly 600 billion, but you have to factor that into the actual value of that technology in our economy and to each and every company that is losing that intellectual property. So, I mean, for just rough math's sake, if you say 10 years worth of value, and a rough order of math, it's 10 years worth of value on 600 billion is $6 trillion. Now you're talking, which is taken each and every year out of the US economy. Maybe it's not $6 trillion, maybe it's somewhere between 600 billion and 6 trillion. Pick the number that you want that fits, but it is catastrophic if it goes on cumulative over time to the US economy. So, it affects every company. I don't care if you're I don't care if you're a distributor or whatever. If you've got competing products coming from China for 30 cents on the dollar, it's very difficult to stay in business that way, especially when you have to pay for new products, new innovation to power your company for the next 5 years and the next 5 years and the next 5 years, and have the rug pulled out from underneath you. And remember, from a very aggressive and insidious adversary who absolutely is in this for the long haul, and it's a life and death fight by our adversary. It's no different than World War II, and I think everybody's waking up to that fact now. And I think that people don't understand how they think that it might be at DEFCON 1 level.
Okay.
How do you measure this? Well, Casey, I get asked this, Casey, where is it on a scale of 1 to 10? And I think people are expecting the answer to be, it's probably a 1 or 2. It's not. If you understand, if you look at what we see, and we have an intelligence group, and we work with expatriates coming back from China and Hong Kong and Taiwan and Russia and so on. And when you add all this stuff up, and we also have a very robust intelligence network, when you add all this up, it is not a 1 or a 2 on a scale of 10. On a scale of 10, it's about an 8.5 or a 9, and And we have to understand that as leaders, senior leaders of companies, and we have to understand that as senior leaders of academia, because that's where all of our innovation is developed and transferred. And by the way, our adversaries have transfer organizations, technology transfer institutes. So when they steal the innovation, it goes into a technology transfer institute, and they extract out how much of this can be commercial to kill the U.S. economy and grow our Chinese economy, and what are the military applications. So it's stripped how it can be used both commercially as well as military. So it's an absolute professional network. I mean, it's a very sophisticated network that they have to extract information, innovation from the West. And by the way, this is not just the United States. Is it an 8.5 in the United States? Absolutely. Is it just as bad for Germany and France and Italy and the UK and Australia and Canada? Absolutely.
So, aside from doing, you do this advisory work with the Department of Justice, the White House and so forth, you also do advisory work in the private sector. Mm-hmm. How often are people coming to you with questions about this now? I mean, presumably this is changing. People are, what I understand is in the past, people just weren't ready to admit, for example, that they'd been cyber compromised or so forth because, stock or whatever reason. How has that whole climate changed about the private sector wanting to know how to deal with this?
It's a sea change.
Okay.
3 years ago, 5 years ago, it's like it's an annoyance, and it was kind of entertainment to have our people speak at conferences, and that's nice to know, and it's kind of, that's interesting. And today the phone rings off the hook. People are like, okay, we know there's a problem. We know it's serious. We need somebody to tell us the truth. My people in my company aren't telling me the truth. They're telling me what I need to hear. I mean, what I want to hear. They're not telling me what I need to hear. So will you come here and tell me what I need to hear? And it's like, yeah, we will certainly do that for you. So it's been a sea change. It's been kind of a relief because, we are, all of us in our company are patriots for America and our heritage and all of our Western allies. And to get the sunlight on this now and to have the phone ring off the wall is exciting and refreshing that we're not alone in this fight anymore, and it's all for one and one for all.
So, okay, let's talk about Huawei, because Huawei is, I think, a great example of something where there's this, again, whole of country approach that the Chinese Communist Party, with huge subsidies, all different aspects of their economy, pushing this one company to be this telecom giant, and basically get into, I think they're operating in 70 countries around the world right now, and new contracts being signed all the time. The US is supposed to come up with its own version, but so far it's been, I think I can say, lackluster, the development in this area. Where do you see this going, and how, I mean, there isn't going to be a American Huawei, I think, or is there?
I think you will see one. I think when the chips are down, Americans perform under pressure, and I think you will absolutely see it. And I think it is lackluster now, but I think that, like I said, when the chips are down, Americans will impress you, and I think that will be absolutely happening. Huawei is, again, run by the Chinese Communist Party, period. Understand that for everybody watching. It's a communist regime. So understand that there's oppression built into it, supporting and growing the Communist Party built into it. 5G is really like a central nervous system in the technology world. The difference between 4G and 5G is a huge quantum leap. So it's basically computing everywhere. And so everything's going to be on that. So in other words, that network or that nervous system, everything you do for your company, for your family, is going to be on that network, or on that 5G network. And if you've got evil, and I'm going to use the word evil, nefarious equipment that is meant to siphon off all your IP, siphon off all your information, use the information to power your artificial intelligence. By the way, the better the artificial intelligence, the more information and data you have to feed your artificial intelligence, the better your artificial intelligence is going to be. So this whole 5G thing is not just a technology race, not just the revenue that it brings to the economies that are participating, but it's also this whole command and control. I mean, having 5G in a country, if the Chinese Communist Party doesn't, if you say something they don't like, if you act in a way that they don't like, they can shut your company off completely, off this 5G network, and they can shut your country off or countries off of this 5G network. So this is, 5G, if you really need to understand it, viewers need to understand it, 5G is another weaponized technology. And that's why Americans, our American government, and we are vehemently opposed to nefarious intentions and nefarious companies having a foothold in the 5G network.
So right now, the UK is, I think it's more than flirting. I think there's been some decisions, at least preliminary decisions made that some aspects of the network will be run, and which of course are accompanied by assurances that of course, no, we can't, of course Huawei isn't going to be beholden to the Communist Party. We'll follow the rules in your country, UK. We will, of course there won't be any sort of systems like, let's say, of the surveillance that we utilize back home for you because we follow your rules. Presumably people believe that. I mean, why else would they choose to put this network in? Tell me about this.
To your point, they believe it, which if you ever studied and know anything about the Chinese Communist Party or any communist regime, you need to understand it's plausible deniability, it's stealth, and it's fake left and go right kind of a deal. So they cannot be trusted. I think that's part of it. The other thing is I think financially there might be some financial gains with it as well.
Well, it's super cheap. It's just been massively subsidized, basically. Right?
But understand that same thing. Remember the money thing we talked about? It comes with its risk. The money comes with risk. So what's your risk tolerance for the money that you're receiving from Huawei to put in a 5G network in the UK? I do not speak for the US government, but it would be very difficult for me if I were to be in the government or in the government intelligence community to share any information with our staunch ally, which is the British government. So it would be very difficult to share information with them if they're going to be putting it on a 5G network that goes straight to the Chinese Communist Party.
When we were speaking offline, you were talking about speaking with a very high-level official that will remain nameless, about how important it is to get the private sector deeply involved in this, kind of emergence, all-of-nation approach. Can you speak to that a little bit?
The government understands that the private sector is in charge of their own destiny, and the private sector is the economy. And the private sector and the economy fund our national security. So the government can't tell the private sector what to do, so the private sector has to kind of fix themselves on this thing. And what the private sector needs to understand, each individual company and each individual university needs to understand their business environment, their academic environment has shifted. Their adversary has shifted their environment for them. What that means is it's foundationed on this whole asymmetric warfare, or hybrid warfare for short. That's the new operating world, operating environment that they're in. So they have to understand, they have to move to this environment to survive as a company. If your adversary is out there, I mean, think about it, a nation state and all of their resources and their command and control is a straight line, is after your intellectual property. I think you're gonna act a little bit differently. So you need to have a security culture in your company. We used to have sexual harassment training in the 80s. We had diversity training in the 90s. We've got to have security training, not just cybersecurity. And by the way, cybersecurity is just one vector, an important vector, a critical vector, but only one. You've got insider threat, you've got other spy issues, you've got, 1,000 talents programs in universities, all these different ways to extract the corporate jewels, the jewels of our economy and our country, and to ship them straight back to an aggressive evil nation state. So companies and universities need to understand this. They're operating in a new environment that under rules they're not familiar with. And it's all based on Asian martial arts theory, and a hybrid warfare type of thing. So corporate strategies at the strategic layer must be remolded and recast on top of this hybrid warfare platform that has been thrust upon them by the Chinese Communist Party and to a lesser degree Russia and the other cast of characters as well. So, and the same thing with universities. You have to cast your university strategy, your 1-year plan, your 5-year plan, and 20-year plan in this new environment. It's not a new environment to the Chinese Communist Party. It's been around since 1986. But to companies, private sector, academia, it's new to them. So their strategies must be recast on top of this hybrid warfare platform. There are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. When you lose your technology, you lose your IP, you're done. There's no question. You're done. You'll go by the way of Nortel, American Superconductor, or you'll be a shadow of yourself or what you were before. And there's just hundreds of other companies that we track that nobody else tracks. So the message is that's the number one message. So where do we go from here? Companies need to understand, protect your IP at all costs. And by the way, this war that the Chinese Communist Party has declared on us, and we look at it as a challenge, but what's refreshing is it's a whole of nation approach from the United States standpoint, and that's what gets me tremendously excited. And the last time I mentioned earlier in our interview is that the last time that this happened is World War II. So I'm excited that we are actually moving forward on it. So we can win this challenge, and in the Communist Party side, their war against us. We can win it by out-innovating them. They're not innovators, but we also have to protect that innovation. So the way to win at this is just absolutely focus on the grand innovation and out-innovate them. But we also have to have a security culture that protects the IP, the corporate jewels or the university jewels and the research. A lot of these universities take government grants to develop very powerful innovation that gets shared with companies and military applications that we've absolutely got to protect at all costs. We've got to vet people who have access to it. We've got to lock down access to it. We have to expect to be attacked, both insider threat through even conventional people that look just like you and I that are turned spies because we're being blackmailed, and as well as the cyber community as well. So we've got to lift our heads out of the cyber world and understand that this problem is a bigger problem. It's not just cyber. Another point I'd like to make to you is one of the fallacies that we're in right now in the United States and the West is the way we view cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, let me start with IT, right, information technology. Back in the day, IT was basically thrown over the fence at the geeks, right? And I liken it to the plumbing of a company. It keeps a company running and so on. And so the C-levels and the CEO and the board just flip it over to the fence, to the geeks, and that's IT, and they keep everything running. No problem. We don't understand it, but they do, so that's cool. We got people for that. And then cybersecurity came along. It's like, well, that sounds kind of like IT. That's okay, let's throw that over the fence to the geeks. So cybersecurity was just a box on top of the IT. So that's been at the tactical layer in the organization, okay? So there's 3 levels of strategy in every organization. You got the tactical layer, on top of that you've got the operational, and on top of that you've got the strategic layer. Our adversaries, by the fact that they attack us and have issued hybrid warfare against us, asymmetric if you want to go there too, they operate at the strategic layer. So we are mismatched in our response back to our adversary. So their war is waged at the strategic layer against every company, every university, and our government. So we've got to migrate. So there's several things that universities as well as every company need to do. They need to move cybersecurity and their strategy, their whole security strategy, up to the strategic layer in the organization. That's number one. They have to create a security culture. We have a culture of sexual harassment training. We have a culture, and by the way, that never took off in the past until we assigned it to the CEO. And the same thing with diversity training. Never took off until we assigned it to the CEO. security training. And inside of security is hybrid warfare, it's insider threat, it's cybersecurity. Cybersecurity isn't all security. Cybersecurity, again, is just a single vector. So it has to be an overall security culture in your organization, in your university, and in your company. And one other point, a key point here also, not just your company, your supply chain. Your supply chain is also of huge vulnerability for your company and a very, very big weak link. Many, I think the number is like 60% of the breaches happen through the supply chain. So you have to really, buddy up to your suppliers and give them some tough love and some Dutch uncle advice and say, if you're going to handle our IP or if you're going to handle our company, this is what we expect you to abide by, and you will be held accountable. So those are the things, the whole global business and academic environment is now on a hybrid warfare platform. It's been thrust upon us. You don't have a choice. That's where you're playing. If you don't adapt and change immediately and get a strategy and put your strategy, your corporate or university strategy, and recast it on top of an asymmetric hybrid warfare platform, you will fail and you will lose. And this is something that's fairly urgent. I'm a realist. I'm not a tinfoil hat guy. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I've never read a Tom Clancy novel. When you look at the intelligence that we look at, and I see day after day, year after year, for as long as I've been doing this, I remember when I first started in this business, in this intelligence piece of it against the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian FSB and so on. I'm like, no way, this isn't happening. No way, this is sci-fi channel stuff, and there's no way this is happening. So after a month, it's like keeps happening. After 2 months, it keeps happening. So I will admit, my learning curve was flat on this thing, and then all of a sudden, it hockey sticked all the way up. And now, after a couple of years, it's like, okay, what are they doing next? That's not surprising. And now it's like, well, that's expected, and that's expected. So every person's going to go through a learning curve on this. It's going to start in kind of like the phases of death, denial, and then mourning, and then all the different things. So it's going to be denial. Everybody's going to say this is baloney. So there's denial, and then you're going to realize that all this stuff's happening. But I think having the U.S. government behind this now, saying that it has to be an whole of nation approach, and it has to be driven by the private sector, I think that'll help people with the early part of acceptance on this and the denial piece of it. It is absolutely as serious. It is the existential threat. FBI director says that it's the largest and the most significant threat to the future of the United States. And you would never hear that coming out of the FBI 5 years ago or in the history of the FBI. So, they're sounding the alarm bells and the alarms for people to rally together, arm in arm, brother to brother, sister to sister, and do a whole of nation approach on this thing.
Casey Fleming, such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.